Welcome to the review podcast on factoring called Factoring Divide and Slide. In this podcast, we're going to look at a very simple factoring method for those of you who've had trouble factoring as you've taken math and that's never seemed easy to you. Here's a very easy factoring method for you to learn. Now, if you've always been very good at factoring, I would not bother with this. You might just work each of the 6 examples. Speed up to the end of the podcast and see if you got them all right. And if you got them all right, don't worry about it. But for those of you who've had trouble, this is a very simple factoring method called divide and slide. It's taught by some of our college prep instructors, and I really liked it, so I thought I'd do a little podcast so y'all would have a chance to see it. First thing I want to do is talk about the word factor itself. There's a factor as a noun, and a factor is a part of a term which is multiplied by the rest of the term. So if you had a term like 6x, the factors of 6x are 1, because 1 times 6x is 6x, 2, because 2 times 3x is 6x, 3, because 3 times 2x is 6x, x, and 6x. Any part of that term which you multiply together with the rest of it to get the whole term is called a factor of that term. Now that's factor as a noun. On your test, I'm going to ask you to factor. I'm using factor then as a verb, and to factor means to express as a product. So what you see here is the example of 6 different problems, all expressed as sums. 8x cubed plus negative 50x. 2x squared plus 10x plus negative 28. And I want to take these sums and I want to change them to products. And when I change them to products, that is called factoring. So let's get on with it. I'm going to show you now the divide and slide method of factoring. The divide and slide method begins like this. Make a T. And on the left of the T, put the product of the first and last term coefficients. The first coefficient is 2, the last coefficient is negative 5. Put here negative 10. And you're going to be looking for 2 numbers that multiply, so I put a dot here. Multiply to give you negative 10. Then go to the center coefficient. The center coefficient is 9, so you want those same 2 numbers to add to give you 9. So I want 2 numbers to multiply to give me negative 10 and add to give me 9. Well, that's pretty easy. 10 times negative 1. That gives me negative 10, and when I add them up, 10 plus negative 1, that gives me my 9. Now, once you've determined your numbers are 10 and negative 1, here's how you proceed. Write x plus the 10, and since the other one is negative 1, write x minus 1. And write it in kind of a factored form like that. And then you do the divide of divide and slide. Now when you divide, you're going to divide by this first coefficient in this problem, 2. And you're going to divide the last terms of each factor. So divide the 10 by 2 and divide the 1 by 2. If it goes evenly, like the first one does, 10 over 2 is 5, then that's your first factor, x plus 5. If it will not divide easy, like 1 over 2, that's when you go to the slide of divide and slide. You take that bottom number 2 and you slide it right over in front of the x. So you get 2x minus 1. And we started with a sum and we ended up with a product. Since there's no sign here, that's multiplying. That means this is a product of x plus 5 and 2x minus 1. And we have factored example 1. Let's go on to example 2. Now in example 2, there's a point that comes up here. Whenever you learn to factor, you're always taught to look for common factors first. A common factor is a factor that is the same in each of the terms. For example, the first term has the factor 2. The second term is 2 times 5x, so it has the factor 2. The third term is 2 times 14, so it has the factor 2. So there's a factor 2 in all 3 terms. Take out your common factor first. Now you take it out correctly if, when you distribute it back to what is left, you get what you started with. So if I make my first term here x squared and I distribute back, I'll get 2x squared, which is what I started with. If I make my second term 5x, When I distribute back, I get 10x, which is what I started with. And if I make my last term minus 14, and I multiply that by the 2, I get minus 28, which is what I started with. So I've taken the 2 out correctly. Now, what I'm going to factor is what's left in this bracket. I'm not going to factor the 2. That's already been factored out. However, that does have to be part of my answer. And this thing I'm going to get to do is so much work, I might forget about the 2. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw an answer box down here to put my final answer. And I'm going to put 2 in the answer box right now, and then leave room for a couple of more factors in the answer box. And I'll get those factors by factoring this x squared plus 5x minus 14. I make my t just as I did before. On the left, I put my product of the first and last coefficients. But remember, the 2's gone. It's down here. So my first coefficient now is 1 understood. So it's 1 times negative 14, which is negative 14. My center coefficient is 5, so I put a 5 here. It's a plus. So I want two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 14 and add to give me 5. Well, again, that's really easy. 7 times negative 2 gives me negative 14, and 7 plus negative 2 gives me positive 5. And so, since my numbers are 7 and negative 2, I write for my factors x plus 7, x minus 2. Now I begin divide and slide. But this time, remember, when you divide by this first coefficient. Well, my first coefficient here is now a 1. So if I divide a 7 by a 1 and a 2 by a 1, they both go evenly. I just get x plus 7 and x minus 2, so there's not going to be a glide. Or if you want to say there's a slide, you could slide the 1 over, but there's already a 1 here, so that doesn't really change anything. So I get 2 times x plus 7 times x plus 1, and the second problem is factored. I started with the sum, and I ended with a product of 3 factors, 2 times the first bracket times the second bracket. Number 3 again has a common factor. This is 3 times 6, this is 3 times 1, this is 3 times 15. I take out the common factor 3. What is left? 6x squared minus x minus 15. And the way that I know that that's correct is if I distribute 3 back across those 3 terms, I get 18x squared minus 3x minus 45, which is what I started with. So now I'm going to be factoring just what's in the bracket. Again, I don't want to forget that 3 is part of my answer, so I'm going to come down here and make an answer box. And I'm going to put a 3 in that answer box just to make sure I don't forget it. Then I'm going to factor what's left. So I make my t. I want to multiply the first coefficient, 6, times the last coefficient, negative 15. 6 times 10 is 60. 6 times 5 is 30. So that's going to be 90. And it's a positive times a negative, so it's going to be negative. My center coefficient is going to be negative 1. Oh, worked out easy again. Look at this. I want two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 90 and add to give me negative 1. Well, that's negative 10 times 9. And of course, negative 10 plus 9 gives you your negative 1. So my numbers are negative 10 and 9, so I'll write x minus 10 times x plus 9 because the 10 was negative and the 9 was positive. Now I want to do my divide and slide. Remember, the 3 is gone, so my first coefficient now is 6. So I'll divide each last term by 6. Well, 6 doesn't go into 10 evenly. Now, when that happens, you've got to get this into reduced form. 10 is 5 times 2. 6 is 3 times 2. So if I think of it like that, I could just cancel my 2's, and that would reduce to 5/3. In the second one, they don't reduce, but they both have the factor 3. So when I reduce it, that's x plus 3/2. That is, 9 divided by 3 is 3, 6 divided by 3 is 2. And I have finished my divide. Now it's time to slide. I take my bottom number and slide it to the front, bottom number and slide it to the front. So I get 3x minus 5, 2x plus 3, and the problem is factored. Better make a neater 5 than that. Now, I go on to example 4, and there's a lot going on here. First off, we don't have 3 terms. We only have 2 terms. Second off, the first one's not even an x squared as usual. However, we notice this. Common factors first. Both terms have a 2, and both terms have an x. So I'm going to start off by taking out 2x. And I get 2x times 4x squared minus 25, because if I multiply back, 2x times 4x squared gives me 8x cubed. 2x times negative 25 gives me negative 50x. So I got what I started with. So the 2x I'm going to move down to an answer box, as I usually do. And then I'm going to use divide and slide on the rest, which is the 4x squared minus 25. Well, notice I don't have a center number this time. I've got my x squared, I've got my first coefficient, I've got my constant, I've got my last coefficient, but there's no center coefficient. So you can think of it like this. You can think of it as 4x squared plus 0x minus 25, and then your center factor, or your center coefficient, is 0. So I make my t, I multiply my first times my last and get negative 100, and I have to get a 0 in the middle. Well, this is easiest of all. 10 times 10 gives you 100, so if you want negative 100, negative 10 times 10. And of course, if you add negative 10 to 10, you get your 0. So my factors are x plus 10 and x minus 10. Now I do my divide and slide. But remember, the 2x is gone. I've already put it in the answer box. So my lead coefficient is now 4. So I'm going to divide each by 4. Well, 4 will not divide 10, so I have to reduce. That's 5 times 2 over 2 times 2, 10 over 4, 2's cancel. So this is going to be x plus 5/2 times x minus 5/2. And I have finished my divide. And now I slide the 2 over in front of the x, so I get 2x plus 5. And I slide the 2 over in front of the x, so I get 2x minus 5, and I have completed the factoring. Let's move on now to example 3. I put example 3 here because it is an example of something called a perfect square trinomial. And a lot of times people learn different methods for each type of trinomial, and I just want to emphasize here that divide and slide works. It works whether it's a difference of squares or a regular 3-term polynomial. It even works on perfect square polynomials, as I'll demonstrate. Notice first I have no common factors. 3, 3, no 3. 4, 4, no 4. No common factors. So I make my t. Product of the first coefficient and last coefficient, 36. Center coefficient, negative 12. So I want to multiply to get 36, add to get negative 12. What numbers could do that? Let's see. 9 times 4 would give you 36, but 9 plus or minus 4 wouldn't give you negative 12. 6 times 6 would give you 36, and negative 6 times negative 6 would give you negative 12. So let's try that. Negative 6 times negative 6 gives me positive 36. Negative 6 plus negative 6 gives me negative 12. And so my factors will start off x minus 6, x minus 6. Now let's do the divide and slide. Go to your lead coefficient for your divide, so I'll put a 9 here and a 9 here. And notice that there's a 3 on top and a 3 on the bottom, so if I cancel my 3's, I get x minus 2/3, x minus 2/3. And I've finished my divide. Now since these are not whole numbers, I do my slide. I take the bottom 3 and I move it out to the front, 3x minus 2. Do the same here, 3x minus 2. And I have factored a perfect square trinomial because this is the same as 3x minus 2 squared. And that is basically divide and slide. Now this last example, example 6, maybe you'll want to turn this off, or maybe after you look at this one, you'll want to kind of go back over the first part to remind you how easy it is. I just wanted to show you that this even works if the factoring is difficult. This is a very difficult factoring problem. The last two factors have a 2, but the first one doesn't. Neither one of the second two factors has a 3, so this has no common factor. You've got to try to factor it from this very, very difficult form. But let's try divide and slide. We make our t. We want to multiply the first number times the last number. 9 times 16 is 144. You might even need a calculator for that one. And it's a positive times a negative, so it's going to be negative 144. For a center term, we have to get negative 32. Gosh, I can't hardly think of any numbers that multiply to give you 144. 12 times 12, but there's no way to put those together to get a 32. So what do you do in a case like that? Well, take that 144 and break it down. See what it's made of. I know it has a 2, so I'll divide out a 2, and I get 72. So I'll divide out another 2, and I get 36. So I divide out another 2, and I get 18. So I divide out another 2, and I get 9. And I know that 9 is 3 times 3. So to get 144, I'd have to multiply a 2 times a 2 times a 2 times a 2 times a 3 times a 3. And if I multiply all of those, I get 144. Now, is there any way to group them so that their sum or difference gives you 32? Well, you know, you can group them any way you want to. You can group the first two, you'd get a 4. You'd group the last ones, you'd get a 36. Ooh, hey, wait a minute here. 4 times 9, 36. That's it. That does it. If you group the first two and you group the last 4, that's going to do it, because that's going to be, now I need a negative 32. So I'll say that's going to be a positive 4 times a negative. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 9 is 36. So 4 times negative 36 gives you negative 144. And of course, 4 plus negative 36 gives you your negative 32. So our numbers are 4 and 36. So I write x plus 4, x minus 36. Now I want to divide and slide. My lead coefficient here is a 9, so I divide by 9. Now you may be tempted on this first one to call this 2/3 in reduced form. It is not. The top is 2 times 2. The bottom is 3 times 3. Nothing cancels. You cannot reduce this. You have to leave it x plus 4 over 9. The second one, though, does reduce. 9 goes into 36 4 times. So this is just x minus 4. So to get your first factor, do your slide. This did your divide. Do your slide. The 9 comes up here. So that's 9x plus 4. Now, did it really factor correctly? Well, let's check it. And really, you could have checked all of these. It's a good idea to check them after you do them. But if you're taking a test, check them at the end of the test. Make sure you finish all the problems during the test. Okay, to multiply the first terms, you get x times 9x, 9x squared. To multiply the last terms, 4 times negative 4, negative 16. Well, that's the way our original problem started out. 9x squared for the first term, negative 16 for the last term. So far, so good. Let's do the center term. Negative 36 for the outside product, 9x times negative 4. Positive 4x for the inside product gives you negative 32x. That is our original expression, so that does check out, and that completes the podcast on divide and slide.